Charles, welcome back to another Sunday with Charles from inside the car. It's a bit of a sad day. Your second favorite president has died, Charles.
Yeah, I've met very few presidents, but remember I met him when he was governor running for president, and he was singularly unimpressive then. I think he was, until Biden came along, he was without doubt the worst president ever, in modern history. And yeah, he's had a long life, but he's one of those guys. I mean, my what I've heard from people who actually studied the way in which various White Houses work, he was his own worst enemy. I mean, he insisted. He actually, someone told me that when he was president, he reviewed who got to play on the White House tennis court.
What?
And can you imagine being, that much of an idiot? I'm
How does he
president
have
of the United
time for
States,
that?
but Charles wants to use the court again. He was there on Tuesday. Why should I let him back? I mean,
Ridiculous.
what do you think? So he was a control freak and inserted himself into too many decisions and didn't have a good sense of priorities. And under his watch, the economy went from doing pretty well to a shit sandwich. So, and not to mention foreign affairs. So I hope historians will study him and give us a fair assessment over time. His family will go through a rough patch now. There'll be the state funeral, I would guess, and the ceremonies attendant to that. Biden will have something to do or pretend to do. I mean, actually, somebody tweeted out that Biden is claiming that Carter wanted Biden to deliver his eulogy.
What?
I mean, yeah, I don't believe that for a second.
Do you know what I find interesting about Jimmy Carter, Charles? He was the first president that I remember because I was a little kid when he was president, and I didn't really know anything about him. I remember more about Dan Aykroyd pretending to be Jimmy Carter and making fun of him, which was pretty darn funny. But in my adulthood, I learned about things like this Operation Eagle Claw, where he tried to rescue the Iran hostages and instead just, had a disaster in the desert, crashed some helicopters and stuff. Pretty bad. I wonder, though, if George H.W. Bush and the CIA didn't mess with this Operation Eagle Claw. We know so much more now about how the deep state attempts to thwart presidents, particularly Trump, and I think we've got more of that cooking.
I don't doubt it. But we're only however many days away you are there in America from the inauguration. And I think we're beginning to see around the world that what couldn't be questioned before can now be questioned. You and I were under the radar screen, I think, when we began, though our audience was pretty strong and rising, and they could afford to basically just ignore us. But on almost every major scam that we've covered together, we have been early to point out, and I am bragging, but it's the end of the year. You look back at the year, you think about and the years, and you're entitled to take stock of your accomplishments and think about how you can improve things. So we called COVID early. We've been relentlessly, the first thing we did together was the business model for charity fraud. And that it now seems on the campi, when you talk to young people coming out of college, well, I'm not working for Microsoft, I'm working for a nonprofit. Going to work for a nonprofit is virtuous until you discover that most of the large ones are complete and utter scams, and very useful vehicles for the deep state and others when they want to do these dastardly projects. There's something up on my Twitter feed alleging that the Clinton Foundation is in Panama working with other NGOs on projects ostensibly to get illegals into the country, but actually that become human and child sex trafficking operations. Wouldn't shock me in the slightest. I'm actually aware of somebody who was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal at a senior level who went down into the Darien Gap and that very difficult place to try to cross. And the tales of woe down there are well known. I mean, that's no person's land, and you're not doing your children a favor, young people a favor, slipping them into our country illegally. You're simply not. And the ghouls at places like Save the Children, on whose board Joe Biden, I think, serves, There's some ghoulish charities, American Red Cross, Clinton Foundation, and others, that end up in places where there are lots of vulnerable people about whom the authorities are not going to ask questions, or worse, um, they're going to actually abuse themselves. So I think it's good that the spotlight is rising on charity fraud, and it's going to take a root and branch restructuring in Washington, D.C., with the IRS cleaned out, the Justice Department cleaned out, and then the files on these various investigations. The standard line on the Clinton Foundation and the Clintons is always, well, we are among the most investigated family on the planet, and nobody's ever successfully found anything. Well, that's because most of the people who allege problems with the Clintons are dead.
Exactly.
You know,
Nobody's successfully found anything. They always die in the middle of the investigation. It's weird.
like that UN guy. Remember, he was about to testify, and his weights fell on him.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
right. Exactly. They're all very bizarre deaths. There's somebody who was going to testify about something with OpenAI who had a little bit of a Clinton situation.
exactly,
It's so sketchy.
exactly. And then, what about the Obama chef? Explain that.
Yeah.
But one of the good things that now is finally happening is so many people bought in to the idea that pick your religion, that he was either Moses or Jesus or Buddha or whatever you want to say. Um, and now finally people are beginning to say, now wait a minute, this guy is a smooth talking con artist. He really is. I mean, and then Dinesh D'Souza, who I think had to pay a fine, and I forget if he went to prison or not, but he has some scathing prison. Yeah, he has scathing video of Obama pursing his lips and using all the techniques he was taught by his speech coaches to try to get sympathy for Kamala Harris and go to the finish line against Trump. When you look back on most of the major things that Barack Obama gets credit for are just utter disasters. His policy of regime change across the world was basically, it's just pathetically stupid. If it's okay for one small country in terms of population to go around the world and say, yeah, we don't like the results in Romania or Georgia or India or China, it's certainly okay by that precedent for China to come in and say, we don't like the results of Trump. We're going to, upend that regime. Regime change is a morally bankrupt policy that the world has suffered mightily over this impulse for regime change, thinking poorly about what happened in Germany. The argument ran, I think, back before you and I were alive, after World War II, early after World War II. Look at all the suffering caused in World War II. If somebody had gone and taken Hitler out before he cemented control over Germany, the world would have been a better place. So let's start picking winners and losers around the world and identify. That was really bad and dangerous thinking that has caused America, I think, to slip way off, even in contention for being a leading power when it comes to foreign policy. And we really need to learn from our mistakes there and atone for them to the extent possible. That's, Obama, Hillary, and Kerry were all into that regime change. And now Biden and stinking Blinken and Jake Sullivan, who was there at the party under Hillary and under Kerry, these people are demagogues or worse.
Indeed. Joe Biden is advertising bounty as he mourns the death of Jimmy Carter. Charles, this looks like the alternate Joe Biden here. He really looks different than he does in certain photographs. It's quite interesting.
Well, again, I mean, back around the time, or shortly before the time you were born, when the storyline ran something like this: the Washington Post was not a big newspaper. New York Times was the paper of record, and the valiant folks at the New York Times were outdone by the rising stars, Woodward and Bernstein, and speaking truth to power about Nixon, and proving what happened with Watergate and removing a president. Those were the days back then when journalism stood in a higher regard than it is now. I mean, the people who brag about being journalists and puff themselves up with their Peabody Awards and their Pulitzer Awards and their Emmys and all this stuff, these people should really need to find an alternative profession. I mean, they're already whores. So, perhaps that's one way they could go and make some ready cash. But I mean, it's just disgusting what they did because, you and I are outsiders. We're not trying to get an audience on a daily basis. We don't need to have access to the White House in order to write our stories, because if we don't have access, ABC or CBS or NBC or somebody else will get that access and we'll look stupid and we'll get fired. We're not playing that game. They are all these prostitutes, and they must have known back in 19 and 20 as the presidential contest took shape. They had to have known that Joe Biden was not even a meathead, that he was non-compos mentis. I mean, think back to the debate when Kamala Harris, the only time she's ever strung a series of sentences together in a meaningful way was the time when she humiliated Joe Biden in the run up to the primaries.
Yeah.
And I remember reporting at the time, there was, he's past his sell by date. Maybe he should drop out of the race. That was the tone they were taking. And then Jim Clyburn, who is an odious, crooked, way in Washington, D.C. too long, jackass, brokers this deal to slip Biden in and foist him on the American public as the alternative to Trump. We really need to go back over all that ground. And if there were, I don't know who could rise to the occasions. Jeff Gerth is pretty old, but somebody like him, who is an old school, fair and honest reporter, needs to go back in and ask some very tough questions about the journalism profession, about mainstream media. We have been sold one bill of goods after another, whether it's, go back, for example, to Bill Clinton and his in theory, praiseworthy fight against HIV and AIDS. That whole project was a precursor to COVID.
Well,
the medicines, and the same people are involved, actually. The medicines that were foisted on and killed many brown-skinned people around the world in particular were brutally flawed, if not diabolical in the case of Ranbaxy. And Ranbaxy is not the only villain. So that was certainly the whole HIV and AIDS are raging crises that only Fauci and Birx and others can solve with the assistance of Bill Clinton. I mean, it's just rubbish. The whole use of EcoHealth Alliance. How was it that you and I were able to figure that out instantly? And it's taken, there still has not been the kind of punishment that should be exacted against those who are operating inside. Peter Daszak belongs in a nasty prison where he needs to worry about his personal safety, as do the trustees of that, because they had to have known. They probably got some kind of wink from, I don't know who, and which or several agencies saying, listen, you're just going to do this. We're the government. We need to do this. It's a matter of national security. Shut up. You can pay yourselves a lot of money, and we're just going to go ahead and do this and don't ask too many questions perhaps the best case, considering Daszak and those other people.
Well, Charles, I would even say, I think you're being too generous. It's not just a matter of them looking the other way and they should have known and this and that. Even when you and I first met each other, it seems that these journalists are actually intelligence operatives. Shane Harris wrote this whole story about Peter Smith seeking the emails, tying in Michael Flynn. I mean, this stuff was all the kindling for the Robert Mueller investigation. And Ben Wittes, who, claims to be a journalist. When you read his biography, he says, he's not a lawyer. He's just a journalist writing about the law. But these people are intelligence operatives engaged in tradecraft, and they're traitors to the United States. It's not just a simple matter of them being incompetent as journalists.
Well, yeah, anybody who signs up, and now that I'm settled, I believe it or not, I don't have any more space available on my bookshelves. Fortunately, I've got shelves that I don't need, so they are going to become bookshelves. But there's a book that was written by Brent Scowcroft, praising the New World Order and why that's a good project. This whole New World Order was a stupid ass idea. It was really stupid. We are not ready for that. It's not going to happen in the next century. We do not have a common way of thinking across the planet about many important issues. Nobody in America is going to submit themselves to, let's say, a global tax regime led by somebody out of India. That's just not going to happen. And until there is one set of tax rules that are applied evenly and fairly, until the cost of government is brought way down, availing itself of the benefits of technology, global governance is a nice project for people who have the time and energy to fly around the world. If we made anybody who's advocating global governance had to live in a fucking tent and eat MREs and Bill Gates' shit water instead of going to fancy restaurants and bars and staying at fancy hotels, I think we'd see a lot less of this nonsense. Yeah. It's time for all of us in all the countries, particularly in America, to turn eyes and ears inward to address the vexing problems that are raging infernos, literal infernos across the United States of America. We don't have bandwidth right now, mind share right now, to be worrying about Syria and Azerbaijan and places far and away. Our educational system right now, we talk a little bit about this H-1B thing. Our educational system is an offense to humanity. It is disgusting what's going on in these schools. These educators are paying themselves way too much money. They are embarked on projects that make little sense and indeed are damaging our young, impressionable minds. And the whole basis upon our education, upon which education happens, is based on 18th century, 19th century ways of living on farms. Why is it that we go to school, that we have the summer off? Why nobody's working on farms in the summer? Why couldn't we either start school later, or accomplish as much learning as we need in a shorter period of time and get people educated to be functioning members of society? I mean, people laugh, and in hindsight, I laughed about the idea of home economics, but that is a good idea, teaching young people how to run their own homes and how to save money and how to dress up and look attractive in interviews and how to understand how to perform useful functions in life, instead of having people, in safe spaces cowering about the end of the world as we know it because the Arctic ice is going to melt, only to find out that Arctic ice is 27% bigger now than it was in 100 years. I mean, it's just
Al Gore
ridiculous.
figured that out.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, and people who want to bleat at a young age, the Greta Thunberg syndrome, to encourage some adolescent punk to go to the UN General Assembly and shout at world leaders, just forget that, Greta. Stay home and focus on doing well in the STEM curriculum so you could be an engineer and actually do something useful. There has to be radical adjustment to get back to the basics. People who should go to school to open their minds to fresh ideas. They need to learn the lessons of history. They have to have basic skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And we need to forget about these equalization projects. There's this really an actual short person, but a mental midget with a PhD, was Robert Reich, is now bleating about how private equity has ruined America. No, you moron. Private equity didn't ruin America. It enriched your pension funds. The biggest investors in private equity funds are the pension
TIA.
Funds. Yeah, TIA, CREF, and CalSTRS, and CalPERS, and you go down along with Texas. He's a complete moron. And you want to talk, Elizabeth Warren, about price gouging. The price gouging occurs in America in the educational system. When you look and take public schools for starters, the amount spent, the true amount spent on public schools per student is astronomically high. And there were some statistics I was just reading that 30%, I think, I don't know if this is across America or one portion of America, 30% of eighth graders can't read. I mean,
Wow.
don't talk to me about
That's good
about
value
price.
for money, Charles.
I mean, I suppose they're afraid that if you could read, you realize how stupid this whole system is. But there's a lot of bleeding. There are a lot of highly paid people getting $20 million book deals. I mean, here Kamala Harris has gotten supposedly,
That's
or going to get
crazy.
it. I mean, that person has never authentically written more than her name, is my guess, and even that you probably can't do properly. I mean, who would pay 20? There's no. I wouldn't pay Einstein $20 million for a book if you could bring him back to life. It's ridiculous. You can't make that kind of. I mean, books cost a certain amount of money to manufacture and distribute, and the public doesn't want to pay. It pained me to pay $40 to buy one of Obama's recent books, and I love books. I've got thousands of them. I mean, it's nobody is a $20 million advance. Is just not justified
Suspicious.
for her.
It's suspicious to me. It's beyond not
Right.
justified. And
I mean, I
Charles,
think
you mentioned earlier in
Go
the
ahead.
show, you were talking about prostitutes. And I don't know if you saw this, but I did a show earlier with Sal Greco about this just incredible scandal where the chief of department at the NYPD was giving out overtime money to have sex with the female officers. I mean, it's insane. The cops are doing crimes themselves. How can they be enforcing the law? It's the same thing in the courts. It's the same thing in Congress, the same thing in the White House.
Well, it's the same. It's actually, that story is similar to the Biden thing. A lot of people had to know about the police messing around, and they saw that and they said, look, if the police are doing it, we're going to do it. So similarly, in Biden's case, he has been on vacation for 40% of his presidency. Think about that. I mean,
I think
I have
100.
been, yeah, right. I've been on vacation, not working for a long time, but I'm not pretending to be president of the United States. I mean,
Nobody's
it's
sending
just,
their tax money to you. You're just hanging out.
I mean, you're sitting there and you've got all these problems. You've got spiking crime. Well, we'll solve that problem by fudging the statistics. You've got a budget deficit that's out of control. Oh, we'll solve that by fudging the statistics. You've got all sorts of initiatives that made, we won't tell the president the truth. I mean, how do you tolerate this? How do journalists tolerate that? You can't live like this. I suppose you can live like this. I bring up Pitcairn Island. It's a small place in the middle of nowhere. If you're Pitcairn Island, I suppose you can do that. Or if you're where I'm going to be going in a few weeks in Indonesia, to very rural Indonesia, I don't think most people will care about, if the suntan lotion is not available on a given day, I'll stay in the shade. There's not much you can do. But this is Washington freaking D.C. when you've got busybodies in every department saying, well, I think we need a strategy for Timor. No, you don't. You need a strategy for doing less and spending less money.
They need a strategy for places like Detroit, New York. Forget about Timor. It's absurd. They're sending billions, and people are still flooded out from that North Carolina Hurricane Helene. It's crazy.
But there are some good rants now on my Twitter feed, I have to say, if people have had it. And the mood, people are going to now get up there and, the Squad and others, or the Dime Store Obama, as Hakeem Jeffries is called, if they want to rant and rave about we need to increase spending and go further to the left, bless their hearts. They're going to be destroyed in the 2026 elections.
Absolutely. Now, Charles, we're just about out of time here in our introductory segment, but people are going to be able to join us for discussion in the First Amendment Forum in just about 5 minutes from right now. People can join us. It also helps me a lot. Sponsor Crowdsource the Truth. Go to odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I've been burning up gas running the car during the shows. But Charles, I've got it pretty dialed in here in the in-car studio, and I'm pleased about that. I'm still working on the final, piece de resistance of the technology of this whole project. Hopefully that'll be working pretty soon, not within 5 minutes, but we will be back for the First Amendment Forum. So stay with us, everybody. Join us on the sponsor exclusive channels, and we'll be right back.